In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, a listener has a strange encounter with a UFO. Project Galileo looks to satellite data for evidence of alien visitation. New insights into the work done at ATIP is revealed with the publication of a new book. And then we look into the disappearance of an Australian pilot after an encounter with a UFO. And in between it all, we find time to explore unintended distractions brought on by Project Galileo and Stephen's attention deficit issues. He started the Galileo Project, which is focused on identifying things
Galileo.
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 Galileo. Figaro.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hall.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
Tonight we are going to be looking at a strange disappearance. This is another episode from Down Unders.
Down Under.
We're going to be looking at the Frederick Valentich disappearance.
Isn't he the guy that said, that's not a knife, this is a knife?
No, I don't think so. There's Paul Hogan.
Paul Hogan. That's right. I get those two mixed up all the time.
But before we get into tonight's main topic, Jimmy, I think you've got a few things for us tonight, don't you?
Well, actually, I do have several things. First, I want to say we still haven't heard from our contest winner. We've heard from 2 of the 3, but our main contest winner has not contacted us yet. And if you're out there and you're listening, you have a short period of time. If you get in contact with us, let's say by the next episode, which will come out next Sunday. So that's going to be, what date is that?
Presumably next Sunday.
Presumably. We have had a little bit of snafus here and there, but if we haven't heard from you by Sunday,
February
the 6th, we're going to have to pick another winner. So
what's the winner's name?
His email starts with Stephen B, and I've sent several communications to that email. And I just sent one today. So if you get back in touch with us, we'll be able to ship this out to you. If you don't, we're going to have to select another winner. And I'd hate for you to miss out on such a wonderful gift package. So,
all right, come on, Stephen B.
Come on, man. I heard back from the other 2 winners like the day of.
Yeah, in fact, one of them shared a story with us, right?
That's right. One of our winners, he was kind enough to let me use his name and talk a little bit about his personal experience with UAPs. It was 1976. He was night fishing with his brother and dad on Natachi Lake in rural Louisiana. Now, that's about a little under 4 hours away from New Orleans. To give you a little idea where it's located, it's a little bit to the north and to the west of New Orleans. They were out on their boat. They had a new engine, a new outboard motor on the boat, and they saw this light that changed colors and darted under a cloudy sky. While that was going on, his outboard motor stopped working. It's brand new. And after the object disappeared, it started up again. Now, his brother and dad and him have recounted the story many times over the years. It made a profound impression upon all 3 of them. And he's gone so far as to email his senator to vote for the Gillibrand Amendment, which did pass. And so this happens to a lot of people, and a lot of people don't report it, and some do. We have these cases where people have these strange encounters that are more than just seeing lights in the sky. There are other events that happen around it that are more extraordinary than just seeing a light you can't identify in the sky, having direct impacts with like electronic devices, for example.
Yeah, that's so common. Car engines stopping and electrical devices failing, and then the object goes away and everything works fine. I think that adds a little bit of, what's the right word? Je ne sais quoi.
I don't think that's what you mean.
No, that means I don't know in French.
I don't think it's what I mean either. I don't think I know what it means. It lends more weight to the story, right?
Right. I mean, confirmation. It adds more confirmation to the story for yourself and for your friends to be like, well, what was that? Was that just, swamp gas or a weather balloon or something? But no, a very odd thing happened. A mechanical device failed and then it goes away. And it's like, hey, It may have been something to that, some kind of electromagnetic interference or something. So, very common thing that happens in UFO sightings.
Yeah, I tell you what, if I was out on the boat on that lake and I had a brand new motor and it was running and it cut off when this light came overhead and then I couldn't get it started again until the light left, you better believe I'm going to be thinking about that a little bit more than just as maybe a firefly that had eaten a large dinner or something up in the sky.
Right.
I'm going to be thinking...
Sandhill crane or something.
Yeah, Sandhill crane or something, reflecting light mysteriously somehow, however they do that. Yeah.
We really appreciate you sharing that story with us. And listeners, if you have a story you would like to share with us on the show, we can do it anonymously or whatever makes you comfortable. Be sure and write into firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. We would love to hear your story. Moving on from there, Jimmy, what kind of news have you run across the past week? Or I should say since we recorded our last episode.
Yeah. So
which has been less than a week. And I apologize, folks. I've had, since 2022 has begun, actually a little before that, I've just had a lot of things going on between work and personal life. I mean, I actually had some tragedy with all this COVID stuff going on. 2022 is not shaping up so great for me so far. So it's made it difficult to get together and get things recorded and edited and put out in a timely fashion. And then, of course, my microphone sounded like a tin can on last episode because I didn't have the correct selection on the software we used when we recorded with Jason. But tonight, hopefully it sounds a little better than it did on the last episode.
You know what? It's like the opposite of leprechaun luck, whatever that is, that you're having this year.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Well, hopefully, I know a lot of people out there have been having, I'm sure, have been having just a difficult time we all have for these last 2 years. And hopefully we'll be able to lighten your load a little bit with some fun stories. And we're going to dive into that right now. We have a pretty good one tonight. But for our UFO stuff, I'm going to start off with a pretty straight-laced one. Avi Loeb, if you're not familiar with him, he's a professor.
Isn't that the guitar player for Poco or something?
I think he does that in his spare time in the evenings. He goes down to whatever the local cabana is in New York or wherever it is.
It just sounds like a rock guy or something.
It does, doesn't it? Avi Loeb.
Yeah.
So he is one of the professors. Do you call them professors at Harvard? He started the Galileo Project, which is focused on identifying things
Galileo.
Galileo. Figaro. So he started this.
I'm sorry.
Why do you do that?
I don't know, man. It's
I'm starting
like
this again.
Tourette's thing with me. Anytime I hear something that reminds me of a song, I just have to sing it, and it's like
Galileo.
air drums, air guitar. Yeah, my wife laughs at me all the time. Even when I'm alone, I have to do like the drum roll or the guitar scrape or whatever. It's like she's always thinking, even after all these years, that I'm going to wreck someday. Trying to play air guitar or hit some particular cue on a.
Not likely. You're a pretty fantastic driver, so I feel pretty confident you're going to be all right. As long as no suicidal deer jump out in front of you.
Anyway, sorry.
So back to my story here, my news article.
Back to the story.
So Avi
Loeb.
Avi penned a article for thehill.com, and in it he details some of the approaches they might be taking in order to see whether or not we're having visitations of otherworldly objects into our airspace. And one of his ideas is to make use of existing satellites that are constantly taking imagery of our skies and already have built up a considerable database and coming up with methodologies where they can take that data, sift through it, and see if anything pops up that is unexpected, something they can't identify with known objects in the sky.
Okay. I read an article somewhere in this article I read about him working with someone that offered to give him like $1 million, a Silicon Valley tech mogul or whatever. Did you hear about that?
No.
Toward this project, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So someone is going to give Avi $1 million to do what?
Yeah. Well, let me read this part of it. I posted this story. I thought you were going to, because I knew you were talking about Avi Loeb tonight, and I thought we had the same story. So Avi Loeb, another thing to remember about this Harvard astronomer, He is the one that, of course, now he didn't discover it, but the object Oumuamua that whizzed through our solar system, which was a confirmed interstellar object, he came forward with some data saying that it's possible this could have actually been some type of artificial extraterrestrial vehicle because of the way it accelerated on its way out of the solar system and changed velocities and things like that. Like the math didn't add up for it just to be an object zooming through the solar system. So he proposed that maybe it was some type of interstellar probe. Now, apparently this has gotten him interested in UFOs, or maybe he already was. So apparently, Eugene Hong, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a Harvard alum who had heard Loeb talking about aliens on a podcast, offered up to $1 million, no strings attached, to explore further this idea of extraterrestrials visiting Earth.
And he can spend it however he wants. I mean, he can spend on margaritas if he wants to.
Well, according to this article, that's really all it says. But it says in July he unveiled the Galileo project, which he says designed in the spirit of revolutionary Italian astronomer Galileo Galilei. Daring to look through the telescopes is the tagline. The goal of the $1.8 million project is to search for evidence of extraterrestrial technology, and one branch is traditional, analyzing possible interstellar objects spotted deep in space by mountaintop observatories. And a construction of a network of rooftop cameras designed to capture any UFOs prowling through the Earth's atmosphere. Wants to enlist more than a dozen astronomers and engineers in the project, as well as some UFO buffs, non-scientists, I guess, but also people who catalog a lot of data. That's more of the data that this Project Galileo plans to look through to try and figure out if we really do have flying saucers.
Yeah, and it all started with Oumuamua.
Oumuamua.
You know what that means? I think it means can't touch this. No, I think it means scout, right? In Hawaiian.
I thought it was, no, yeah, something like that.
I think
I was
scout.
thinking fast, but that's actually wiki. That's where wiki, the wiki encyclopedia.
We don't have to guess. We can type it in here.
Wikipedia, that's what it means. Speedy or something like that in Hawaiian. Wiki
Oumuamua. Speedy Scout. The name comes from the Hawaiian Oumuamua scout and reflects the way the object is like a scout or messenger sent from distant past to reach out to humanity. It roughly translates to first distant messenger. Pretty
Is
cool.
it like saying scout in English? Moa?
No, I think it's just one word. It says
Why didn't it just
scout.
say Moa?
I don't think the language works that way.
In Hawaiian, that probably means something completely different, like pineapple.
It probably does. It's a beautiful language. So that's my first news story. What do you got?
I have a story I ran across. Let me pull it up here. This comes from stacker.com, and it was actually from August 9th of 2021. Stacker took data from the National UFO Reporting Center, or NUFORC, who has documented around 90,000 UFO sightings since 1974. Using this data, they have ranked each state for the number of UFO sightings. And I thought that what might be fun would be to look maybe at the top 20.
All 20? How long's this episode? Sure. Okay, well, hit me.
Number 20, with 1,759 sightings, South Carolina.
I can see that.
Indiana's number 19.
Yeah, I can see that.
Missouri, number 18.
Yep.
17 is Massachusetts.
Really?
Number 16, Virginia, surprised me a little bit. 1,913 sightings.
It's a lot.
Georgia comes in at number 15. New Jersey at number 14. Colorado at number 13. Of course, they did just legalize marijuana there a couple of years ago. That sounds like something you would say. I can't believe I said that.
I can't believe you said that either. There's no correlation.
Well, here's
there.
Another one. Yeah. Number 12 is Oregon.
Oh, there might be a correlation there.
2,316 sightings.
I hear they lace
Number 11
stuff.
is Michigan, surprisingly.
Yeah,
North Carolina, number 10. Illinois is number 9. Ohio, with 3,012, is number 8. Arizona, number 7.
Yeah.
3,188 sightings. Pennsylvania comes in at number 6. New York is number 5 with 3,830.
Yeah, that's where they try all those designer drugs, though, in New York City, so it probably slants the curve a little bit.
Texas, number 4, 3,848 sightings. Washington State.
Washington State, huh?
Number 3.
A lot of Bigfoots up there, too.
Number 2, Florida.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, well, Disney shoots off a lot of fireworks.
Number 1, take a guess.
Number 1, I'm going to guess one of those western states, like, California. It's probably California.
There you go. Good guess. In fact, number 2 is Florida with 5,826 sightings. California, number 1 with 10,333 sightings.
Yeah, but they ate a lot of those weird brownies in San Francisco, so I'm just saying.
Do you think that's what it is?
Yeah, you can see all kinds of stuff. You eat those brownies, so I've been told.
Where do you think West Virginia came in?
Well, I mean, if they're basing it purely off of not per capita, but just based off
just
of
sightings,
straight sightings. I mean, we're small population states, so I would guess somewhere in like our education, somewhere in the 40s.
Yeah, number 40, 621 sightings.
That's actually a little higher than I was expecting.
Yeah, but we have some good ones.
We do.
All right, and number 50 was North Dakota.
Well, there's like 3 people in North Dakota.
I was surprised Alaska was really low too, but I guess like you're saying, these low
Not many people.
density state. District of Columbia actually came in at 51, but it's not a state, so
Yeah, and it doesn't count.
So
we don't even let them vote.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, do you have another news story for me?
I do. I have one from Mystery Wire, which is a pretty good one. It talks about that ATIP program and sheds a little bit more light on what it was really about. The program was first proposed and later managed by a career intelligence analyst and rocket scientist named Dr. James Latsky, who spent much of his career working for the Defense Warning Office within the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. In 2007, Latsky became interested in stories about bizarre activity and unknown aerial phenomenons reported in and around a property known as Skinwalker Ranch in northeastern Utah. Latsky and a few Pentagon colleagues read and discussed the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, and wondered if the unusual activity investigated by a scientific team at the ranch might represent both a threat and opportunity for national defense. So in the summer of 2007, he met the owner of the ranch, Las Vegas businessman Robert Bigelow, and visited the property where he had a profound encounter with the unknown. That experience led directly to the creation and funding of AAWSAP, which was the predecessor to ATIP, which was called the Advanced Weapons Systems Application Program.
Just in case listeners don't know, the one that Lou Elizondo was associated with ran the program for a few years.
Now Dr. Latsky is sharing the story of the secret study, how it was organized, what it investigated, and the conclusions it reached. Very little of this information has been made public prior to the publication of a new book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. The book is co-written by Dr. Colm Kelleher, a microbiologist who was a principal program manager for the DIA's contractor BAASS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, a subsidiary of Bigelow Aerospace. Kelleher was in charge of screening and hiring more than 50 scientists, investigators, data systems experts, and others who spent 3 years probing UFO cases, interviewing eyewitnesses, collecting and analyzing physical evidence, and building what might be the world's largest UFO/UAP database on behalf of the DIA. So now we have this book out there, which I plan on getting and reading, called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Pentagram. I mean, either work, right?
Sort of a Freudian slip there, right?
Well, you know what? The Pentagon could be a pentagram. There has been speculation, I'm sure. And we'll get a little bit more information about what went on there. And it's interesting that they have listed as one of the authors George Knapp of Mystery Wire.
George Knapp is the Channel 12 Las Vegas news reporter that brought us Bob Lazar.
as well as many other stories of UFOs, not just Mr. Lazar.
Yeah.
So they have a list of partial summary of findings here. You want to hear a couple of them? Yeah, I mean, this is some pretty bizarre conclusions or findings, particularly if they're coming from scientists. Number 5 in the list here they have in this particular article says the following. Being in the vicinity of metallic/structured craft and associated phenomena can cause experiencers to bring something home with them. AAWSAP proposed an infectious agent model for the transmission of anomalies from person to person. The nickname for this phenomenon is hitchhikers.
Weird.
This can't be coming from scientists, can it?
Define scientist.
One who conducts experiments based on the scientific method in an effort to get to objective truth. They hired Russian translators who aided with the translation and analysis of Soviet-era documents on their national UAP strategy. Showed a very complex, well-organized organizational chart from 1991 that indicated a very sophisticated approach that spanned multiple agencies.
In the Soviet Union.
In the Soviet
Former
Union.
Soviet Union.
Right.
Okay.
So other countries are taking this seriously.
What are some other finds that they had? Do you have anything? You said you had
they designed and built a portable autonomous UAP surveillance unit with multiple sensors that could be deployed anywhere in CONUS, continental U.S. That's probably what that is. They contracted with multiple laboratories to chemically analyze anomalous samples from alleged crash sites and other sources.
I still wonder some about ATIP Bigelow Aerospace, who won the contract, who had some connection to Harry Reid, who really headed up ATIP. You know, his facilities, one of the things they wanted was a place to store anonymous materials. Now, according to Bigelow and Harry Reid and other people that have talked about the program when it was going on, they didn't have anything. But then still, you make sure that you have a storage facility just in case some show up. You know, that makes you wonder, did they have something, or had they heard of something? Was there rumored to be something? Or did they store something and then were sworn to secrecy or something? You know?
I don't know, man.
A piece of a crash saucer or something. I mean, that was part of the contract. I remember reading that when we covered that whole ATIP program back a few episodes back, but I just remember that sticking out whenever you mentioned that anomalous materials. Why would you stipulate that in the contract with the government is, well, you have to have these storage facilities. Now, I don't know what the specifications for that were. I don't know if it had to have lead shielding or electromagnetic bubble around it to keep it from emanating some type of space rays or something, but still, it was in the contract.
Or possibly it's made out of old timber that's not fire retardant and guarded by a guy named Jed.
Could be, but unlikely.
You never know with these old guys. You know, have you ever seen Mr. Bigelow? He doesn't instill confidence in me. I know he's a billionaire.
And no, incidentally, did you see Harry Reid passed away just as we're recording this, maybe about a week and a half ago or so?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, he made his appearance in a few documentaries, the one with James Fox, The Phenomenon. Mm-hmm. He talks about ATIP and his belief that we need to take UFOs, UAPs seriously.
And these are folks who have seen documentation from government agencies, allegedly. They never come out and say, though. Why don't they just come out and say?
I don't know.
All right, we've seen some little green aliens, some blue ones, and some purple ones.
If you had seen what I'd seen, you would believe.
If you had seen what I'd seen, you wouldn't eat peanut butter again.
Don't say that. It's one of my favorite foods.
Peanut butter is actually Soylent Green. So that's my news stuff for this week. I think that's enough. I mean, it's pretty big news. At least it was to me.
Right. Well, let's move on to tonight's main topic. But before we get into that, I would like to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. Go to our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. There you can find ways to support the show, namely a little coffee cup icon in the upper right-hand corner called Buy Me a Coffee. Also, we have a web store where we have t-shirts, coffee cups, and other Cosmic Sponge merchandise that you can buy for yourself or buy as a gift for friends and family. And what better way to say I love you and I love the weird than buying something from Cosmic Sponge web store. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Our contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. gmail.com and send us those stories. We want to have them. We want to compile a database, right, Jimmy?
A database of stories from around the country.
Around the world.
Around the world.
You know, I was looking at our stats, man. I think our past 5 episodes, about a quarter of our downloads were from Europe, believe it or not. So thank you, all international listeners.
That's right.
So anyway, maybe our Australian listeners will be adamantly interested in this next story. This is going to be about the Frederick Valentich UFO incident or disappearance. And this gentleman, young man, was a civilian pilot who disappeared. And before he disappeared, he had quite an interesting exchange with the control tower. So, Jimmy, I know you've done some legwork on this one.
Little legs are just moving fast tonight.
Why don't you give us a rundown on the Frederick Valentich disappearance?
It was 6:19 p.m., October 21st, 1978, as Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport, Melbourne. His destination was Kings Island. It would be his first night flight, totaling 3.5 hours of total flight time round trip. The weather was good, light clouds, with excellent visibility. He flew along the coast, turning towards Kings Island. Once he reached Cape Otway, he would turn west to fly the last 52 miles over open ocean on the last leg of his flight to Kings Island. He was flying about 4,500 feet. At a little over 7 p.m., he contacted Moorabbin Control Tower, inquiring about other possible craft in the area. This began an unusual series of communications between Frederick and the Moorabbin Airport Control Tower. Let's take a listen.
This is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?
No known traffic.
Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet.
What type of aircraft is it?
I cannot confirm. It's 4 bright, seems to me like landing lights. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity?
No known aircraft in the vicinity.
Seems to be playing some sort of game. He's flying over me. Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft, it's...
Can you describe the aircraft?
As it's flying past, it's a long shape. Cannot identify it. It has such speed. It's before me right now, Melbourne.
How large would the object be?
Seems like it's stationary. What it's doing right now is orbiting. The thing is just orbiting on top of me. It's also got a green light and a sort of metallic, like, it's shiny on the outside. It's just vanished. That strange aircraft's hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
Frederick was never heard from again. A search and rescue effort was launched, but neither Frederick nor his plane was ever seen again. Other eyewitness accounts of UFO sightings occurred in the area around the time of Frederick's last flight. The incident, to this day, remains unsolved.
Yeah, so that is very strange, especially when you hear that exchange, the control tower in the last moments that Mr. Valentich was ever heard from. Now, let's go a little bit into his background. Frederick Valentich was a civilian pilot. He was 20 years old at the time that this incident occurred. He had about 150 total hours flying time. He had what is known as a Class 4 instrument rating, which authorized him to fly at night, but only in what is known as a visual meteorological conditions. And I'll get into that in just a moment. He had twice applied to enlist in the Royal Australian Air Force, but was rejected due to inadequate educational qualifications. He was a member of the RAAF Air Training Corps, and he was determined to have some type of career in aviation. Valentich was studying part-time to become a commercial pilot, but had a poor achievement record, having twice failed all 5 commercial license examination subjects. Let's see, he had been involved in a few flying incidents. He had strayed into a controlled zone in Sydney, for which he received a warning, and he twice deliberately flew into a cloud, for which prosecuting was being considered at the time of his disappearance.
Wait. Can we back up there for a minute? Let me get this straight. He can be prosecuted for flying into a cloud?
Yeah.
That'd be like me getting prosecuted for driving into some fog.
I think it means he deliberately flew into it, even though he did have an instrument rating. But when you're in a cloud, you have to remember flying in an airplane's three-dimensional. It's very easy to get disoriented when you're in a cloud because you can't tell where the ground is. You can't tell where the sky is, right? The horizon. I mean, you have to rely on your instruments, and it's very easy actually to fly upside down and go out of control when you're inside a cloud. Really, if you have a full instrument rating in airplanes like your commercial pilots would have, I mean, they can fly completely by the instruments. I mean, you think about a flight at night, that's another time it can be very dangerous and disorienting to fly because especially if you can't see the ground, can't tell where the horizon is, things like that. If you have low visibility, it's very, very easy to get disoriented. The airplane can be on its side. It can literally be upside down and you just don't realize it. And once the airplane, especially if you're in that cloud or it's night or whatever, and you think the airplane is in a different orientation and you are using the controls to try and, I need to straighten the airplane out, but then you're actually on your side and you think you're rolling the wrong direction or you're going upside down. Some of these kind of things, it's very easy to happen. So that VMC is an aviation flight category in which the visual flight rules is permitted. What that means is conditions in which pilots have sufficient visibility to fly the aircraft, maintaining visual separation from the terrain and other aircraft. It sort of means that you can fly by instruments. You still need to be able to see things around you in a visual way to where you can see, make out the horizon, be able to tell where other aircraft are. I mean, literally, people, very good instrument flyers can put a hood over themselves and fly their aircraft, take it off, land it and everything, and never once look out the windows. I mean, that's the way commercial airline pilots can fly. Right? This rating that he had meant that he would have to be able to actually make visual contact with things in his surroundings, as well as rely on his instruments. But one interesting tidbit about this individual is that his father, Guido Valentich, said that he was a very avid UFO buff, that he had a keen interest in flying saucers and UFOs. Now, is that all just a coincidence? Probably, maybe, I don't know. But I think it's worth noting.
What year was that he...
He disappeared in 1978.
Hey, so have you seen... have you watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I'm sure.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. You remember that scene in there where the control tower is talking to a pilot? There's this back and forth. It's almost... it's in many respects similar to the control tower conversation with Valentich.
Yeah, Close Encounters, I believe, was released in 1977.
That's right. I'm pretty sure, because it was the same year as Star Wars.
I remember it specifically because it lost out to special effects. I used to be very interested in special effects and movie making and stuff when I was a kid. And I remember it losing out to Star Wars for best special effects.
Really? I mean, Star Wars, come on, it wasn't that great.
Just visual effects, special effects.
I was joking. Star Wars was awesome.
Okay.
You dummy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like, okay, man, whatever, but they used motion control photography and a lot of very sophisticated techniques.
Didn't Clash of the Titans come out?
Just for that film. Yeah, it was very groundbreaking movie I mean, you couldn't see the strings or anything on the bottles.
Way better. It was a step up, baby.
Yeah, right. So anyway, let's get back to the disappearance here. As you heard in the exchange with the control tower, I mean, it sounds as if he's encountering some type of unknown aircraft, some type of unknown craft for sure. Let's just jump right into the investigation. What, Jimmy, do you think are probably the most common explanations for his disappearance?
A loose spider in the cockpit of the plane caused him to freak out and crash. There was
dropped his Pepsi in his lap. Dropped his beer.
dropped his beer. Yeah. Well, no, come on. Australians can drink as much as they want and fly. They're fine. It's lightweights like me you got to worry about. I think there are several. I mean, okay, let's entertain. It was a UFO, and the UFO caused the plane to stall out, crash, and he dumped in the ocean. Or they abducted his entire plane and him for some other purposes, nefarious or otherwise.
Or it could have been destroyed vaporized by the spacecraft.
Oh, yeah, disintegrated because no evidence found. So there
Right.
could be a disintegration ray. Let's put that one on the table because, I mean, we know aliens love their disintegration rays. And then it could be the possibility of just pilot error.
And another one is that, now these are a little more down to earth. One proposal is that he staged his own disappearance and that he did this exchange with the tower and then cut the radio and then flew off somewhere else. The only thing about that one that I have a problem with is that the Cessna 182 was rented. And, I'm sure it would have had to have turned up somewhere if he flew away into oblivion. One of the other proposals is that he staged an elaborate suicide. None of his friends or family or anyone that knew him thought that he had any reason to be suicidal, but possible. I mean, that he just, made up the story about sounding like he was being attacked by a UFO. But I think if that were the case, it seems that he'd be a little more like, it's a flying saucer, it's coming right at me. Or all he says is it's not an airplane. I think if he was staging an elaborate suicide and wanted people to think that something happened to him with it being a flying saucer, I think it just seems to me that he would be a little more obvious. What do you think?
Well, there are several other things that I found bizarre about the story.
Now, there is also the idea that he became disoriented, was actually flying upside down, and the lights that he saw were actually the lights of his own airplane being reflected by the ocean, by the water. So he's upside down. And again, this is easier to happen in a light airplane than you think, and not be able to tell what orientation you are, especially after dark. So if he thinks he's flying right side up, but then he's looking up when he's actually looking down, and he sees his own lights reflected on the water, he's assuming that's another airplane above him or another craft. And then because he was flying this way, he ended up eventually crashed into the water and then just disappeared into the ocean, which is not hard to do. I mean, I know there was never a trace found, but really the ocean is large and the airplane was relatively small. And it can be very difficult to find a small plane like that underwater. It doesn't surprise me no trace was found. The one issue with this explanation, though, is that was a carbureted engine in that Cessna, meaning that if it flew upside down for any length of time, that the engine would have quit because it relies on gravity to fuel the engine. It's designed to be flown right side up, right? It's not an aerobatic aircraft. It's not fuel injected. He did report that his engine was starting to run rough before the radio contact was lost. Still, during that entire exchange would have probably been way too long before his engine would have quit altogether. I mean, you roll it over, the engine would have ran, just for a few minutes, probably rough, and then it would have quit pretty quickly just because it wasn't getting any fuel.
So there are a few things that are unusual about the story. First of all, when Frederick went on this trip, he had told his family and girlfriend that his intention was to fly to Kings Island to pick up some crayfish. There were no crayfish to be had on Kings Island at that time of year. The other story that he had told officials, flight officials, was that he was going to Kings Island to pick up some passengers, which was also not true. Additionally, Kings Island's airport required you to log your flight so that they would have someone in the tower when you arrived after hours, because normally, if there are no flights incoming, they would turn off the landing lights for the runway, which presumably he would know about. There would be no one there to turn them on if he needed to land or to guide him in if there was an issue. These are all some pretty unusual factors that feed into this theory that maybe he committed suicide in an elaborate way. Then again, who knows what was going through the mind of this 20-year-old kid who was doing his first night flight to Kings Island without giving all the proper information or flying, and he seemed haphazard about his approach to flying anyway up to that point with some of the other stories we've heard about his antics while flying that went up to the point of possible prosecution.
On the other hand, I think that he told his girlfriend and his parents he wanted to go pick up some crayfish, and then he told the officials he was going to pick up some friends. I don't know. I thought to myself, maybe he just wanted to fly to Kings Island and just fly back because he just wanted to go there. And it didn't want to say, well, I just want to fly tonight. I just want to do a night flight and fly to Kings Island, land, and hang out for a little while and come back just for the joy of flight. So he just told people those things to have a reason to fly there, especially a 20-year-old kid. That doesn't surprise me in particular.
So 1978 was the biggest flap for UFOs in Australia. Documents around Valentich's disappearance were released to the public in 2012. Mr. Watson said that these backed up his belief that it was a UFO that caused the disappearance.
Who was that?
He's a historian. His name is historian Reid Watson. He's been researching the disappearance for many years. He says he's looked into it for about 3 decades. And he told Leon Compton of the 936 ABC Hobart, I have to say, in my opinion, he had an encounter with a UFO, and I don't say that lightly. He does this pretty extensive investigation into the background of this sighting. He claims that Valentich went missing on that day because he was anxious to get in as many flight hours as he possibly could.
And I'd like to point out 150 flight hours at the age of 20 is not bad. I mean, that's a good bit of flight experience.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend who's now a commercial pilot. His story and background is very similar, other than he was academically pretty strong when it came to all things flight related. And he worked in a control tower while he was in high school. He got out of high school. He worked at the Civil Air Patrol, which is the equivalent, I think, of the Australian Air Corps training group. And he spent a ton of time flying through high school all the way up into his early 20s, just trying to get enough hours in so that he could get into one of the small flight commercial units, because their requirements are pretty extraordinary. And most people who are commercial pilots don't go that route. They go into the military because they get a ton of flight time there.
For free. On Uncle Sam.
Exactly.
Right.
The cost of fuel and renting a plane is pretty expensive. And a lot of these guys...
But you can do it.
Well, a lot of these guys will go into the Civil Air Patrol in this country because you only have to pay for the fuel. You don't have to pay for the plane when you take it up. So it gives you a little bit of a benefit.
Yeah, I looked at that when I was a teenager. I was very interested in aviation. I looked at the Civil Air Patrol myself. I knew I'd never get into the Air Force with my vision. I figured that out when I was about the 9th grade. I'm like, well, there goes my Air Force.
I thought it was your red hair that'd keep you out.
Well, you know.
We don't want any short-tempered people in the Air Force.
Come on.
Wait a minute. They'd want short.
That's just a myth, damn it.
Don't make me come over there and punch you in the eye.
Don't make me drive up there tonight.
You know, when my beard does come in, at least when I was younger, it is like as red as... It's probably redder than your hair.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That's
it's
weird.
red.
It's weird considering when you had hair, it was brown.
Yeah. Who knows? My beard comes in red. It's my Irish background.
It's your Irish coming out.
That's right. So, Mr. Watson here, Reg Watson, has done a ton of research on this, and he comes away saying, I think it was a UFO.
Okay. Well, what's his reasoning besides just the exchange with the tower?
In and around the disappearance of Valentich, they had, let me see, for 2 months prior to October the 21st, lights in the sky, cigar-shaped objects were seen from Kings Island. I've spoken to witnesses on the northwest coast of Tasmania who actually saw a craft on that day 15 minutes before he went missing. He said 1978 has been called the biggest flap in Australia's history. Sightings were seen not only from Tasmania, they were seen as far away as South Australia, right through the coast of Western Australia, even up to the coast of NSW, or New South Wales.
So he cites that there were quite a few UFO sightings in the area, a few months leading up to this disappearance, right?
And he looked into the other theories that he had concocted an elaborate hoax, that he had perhaps wanted to commit suicide, and each one of these, as he explored it and investigated by talking with friends and family, got shot down just because he was well-adjusted, he was loved by his family, loved by his friends, reciprocated that, had a good life, nothing was going wrong, no indications whatsoever. Nothing to support that theory.
I ran across a paper. This was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The paper was published in 2000. It's by a Richard F. Haynes and Paul Norman. Paul Norman's from the Victorian UFO Research Society. This is no doubt going to be a pro-UFO paper, but I would like to point out it is very thorough. They go through, leading up to it, Frederick, his experience, his disappearance. They draw maps of his flight path. They even point out that there's like a little place that pilots will shave about 3 or 4 miles off of their flight plan, things like that. It said almost all pilots do that, and they pointed it out that he did as well. I think there was a witness or something that saw his airplane around the time that he would have done this thing. And I said it is very thorough, talking about his entire flight path and changing headings and at what time it probably was, and the winds. There was no headwind, anything like that that would have delayed his flight, how long it would have taken. So they were very good at estimating where he was at the time of his disappearance, his location. One of the authors of this located and interviewed a number of people traveling or living in the region around Great Ocean Road, and that road would have been visible where the airplane and this object was, which runs north to south through Apollo Bay. Reports were obtained from 20 eyewitnesses in this region describing an erratically moving green light in the sky at the same time of evening as Valentich's flight. In addition, he learned that 3 primary eyewitnesses who shed valuable new light on this event. So the primary witness is a Mr. Ken Hansen. Now, this is apparently a pseudonym. It says this in the paper, so we don't know who it was 47 years old at the time. Mr. Hansen and his 2 nieces had been shooting rabbits on the late afternoon of October 21st, 1978 in the hills about 2 kilometers west of Apollo Bay in the direction of Mariners Falls. He said that it was dusk, but he could not recall the exact time. They were in his 4-wheel drive vehicle driving east on Barnum Valley Road toward his home on the southeastern outskirts of town. And one niece, Tracy, was sitting in the right front seat beside him. His other niece was in the back seat. Tracy first sighted colored lights in the sky on their right side. The automobile was traveling about 30 miles per hour at the time in the left lane. Suddenly, she said, "What is that light in the sky?" As the automobile continued, Hansen craned his neck to look out to the right side of the window in the direction that she was pointing. He caught sight of some lights and said to her, "Those are only lights of an airplane." "No," she replied. "I mean the other large green lights above it." He drove on, then turned to look again some 10 to 15 seconds later. At that point, he also was able to make out 2 separate sets of lights in the clear but darkening sky. They continued down the road, although Mr. Hansen was slowing down now because of the left turn ahead and because he wanted to see the strange set of aerial lights. Mr. and Mrs. Hansen live near a small airstrip. They are knowledgeable about aircraft and their appearance of their lights at night. He noted clearly the familiar lights of a small airplane. Both aerial objects had passed through a 30-degree arc toward the east during this initial sighting interval, which lasted about 28 seconds. Although it is not uncommon to see the lights of small airplanes in this vicinity, the presence of the large green light was so unusual that Hansen decided to pull over, stop, and get out of his automobile. He said that when he did so, he clearly saw a second large greenish circular light like it was riding on top of the airplane. He said it also kept a constant distance above and slightly behind the airplane's lights at all times. He stood watching for another 15 or 20 seconds until both lights had disappeared from sight. Thus, that ended the sighting. And then the paper goes on to estimate all these distances because they went there with this witness, plotted out the pilot's path and the time of day and all this kind of stuff, and point A, point C, and all the details in 182L. But anyway, the conclusion of this paper, they go through some other things too, estimate the size of the UFO. It's a pretty in-depth paper. Their conclusion at the end of it all was that I had some kind of strange encounter. I didn't find it here, or did you find any witnesses that actually saw the plane go down or anything like that?
So Keith Basterfield, we've mentioned him before, I think during the Westall episode that we did. He's a UFO researcher, a feet on the grounds kind of guy. He went looking for information on the incident. He had been told by the government in 2004 that the official file had been lost or destroyed on the incident. He found it when searching through an online National Archives index on an unrelated topic. The file has since been digitized and uploaded onto the archives website. Keith Basterfield, the skeptic, goes and finds this document dump and gets a lot of new information that previously wasn't out there to the general public. He explains that the newly released files reveal that parts of the aircraft wreckage with partial serial numbers were found in Bass Strait 5 years after the disappearance. Also, one pilot searching at the right time and place saw debris that appeared to be from a Cessna, but before he could get a good fix on the position, it apparently sank. This makes it extremely likely that Valentich's aircraft simply crashed into the water in the darkness, although it falls short of conclusive proof. So we do have one person who was searching for Valentich that saw Cessna-like wreckage in the ocean. There is a 315-page official file still out there that you can go through if you are determined to look into this in more details. You can go to the National Archives of Australia, click on the Collection 3, doing a record search on box type VHDSJ6. And I'll try to find this and put a more direct link to it on the website on our website.
Another little piece they have in this paper that I think is interesting is they don't believe that at least during the time of the transmission, that the aircraft dropped below 3,000 feet. I guess if it was lower than that the radio signals would have been weaker. But he's saying that it still should have been above 3,000 feet because of the signal strength on the recording. I don't know the details of that. It's just something they put in the paper.
Yeah, he had also told his girlfriend when he would be returning, and the time frame did not sync up. Originally, when I looked at this, it looked like he told his girlfriend that he would be back well before it was even possible. Some further digging indicated that he actually left 40 minutes late than what he originally intended, which may account for some of that time difference. Also, the path that many of the previous people had looked at that he would have expected to take might have been a little bit longer than a shorter path that he could have taken to get there. You could take a direct path from Moorabbin Airport out to Kings Island, but most, particularly people in small planes, would fly up the coast to Otway and then turn over to the ocean because it was a shorter run over open ocean to get to the island. He did log his flight plan with Moorabbin Airport base. He just didn't log it with King Island.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add to that. I mean, it is a strange mystery that, just goes down in the annals of strange UFO encounters. I mean, I think it's clear that he believed he had some kind of encounter as he was flying his aircraft. I've read some other accounts that said perhaps he became distracted by this object, and that's what caused him to crash. Became disoriented because whatever this object was doing around him or what have you, that it really, maybe the object didn't really have anything to do with the crash other than it just distracted him. A pilot who wasn't very experienced flying at night may have become disoriented on account of this strange encounter. Who knows? And the fact, again, that no wreckage was found. A Cessna 182L is very small, single-engine aircraft. If you don't know exactly where it went down, if the water's somewhat deep, it can be very difficult to find, and he did crash or disappear at night. I'm assuming his search and rescue teams got out there the next morning, or maybe they started that night. No trace was ever found. And, of course, there's currents in oceans that can move these things around, or especially if the plane broke up when it hit the water, if it hit the water and crashed, it could have been scattered easily on the ocean floor.
There's some other information here. Did you know that Mount Stromlo Observatory noticed that the night of the 21st of that year was the peak of a meteorite stream with 10 to 15 sightings per hour achieved? So maybe it got hit by a meteor.
A grain of sand.
Hey, it could happen. I mean, stranger things, right? And
Right.
That piece of wreckage that washed up on shore, it had a partial serial number, but it did not match his plane.
Right.
It was
some other crash.
a different
probably.
Cessna, a different model Cessna.
I guess this one is just one of those mysteries that will never be solved.
Or maybe someone will find his plane somewhere on the bottom of the ocean once, we become fish people.
You still wouldn't know if a UFO was involved, though. Not truly.
Well, could know, right? Because maybe he got in like an aerial battle with the Martian dudes, and he actually grabbed one of them out of the flying saucer and was strangling it on the way down and saying, all right, enough of this, you. And then, under the water, you got a little gray alien with his hands around his neck.
They both went down, or maybe there was a mid-air collision like what happened with Injured Cold, the saucer crash.
Oh,
how he met his demise. I mean, maybe they crashed into each other and the debris of both craft are just waiting to be found on the bottom of the ocean.
That's a story waiting to be told.
What else do you have for the disappearance of Frederick Valentich?
Is it Valentich or Valentich?
I'm saying Titch.
I'm saying Tick. That way we cover both bases.
We've been saying it that way all night. So
I had heard it as Valentich.
Okay.
I really don't have anything to add to this. I find it incredibly interesting that you have ground-based observations even during the flight that confirm his view of what was going on from within the
green
plane.
Object.
Yeah.
Right.
And that in and of itself, could it be a reflection off of a cloud? There were clouds in the sky, but not many. It was mostly clear night with clear visibility, right?
Well, I think when you look at the witness testimony, if it is to be trusted and believed, these people live near an airport that has general aviation, so they know what airplanes look like at night that are flying around or right at dusk. They clearly see the airplane and clearly see the strange green circular light as well and recognize it as being something different. That coincides with the tower exchange.
Yeah.
Now, this was a very famous case, and they released this audio of the tower exchange, I believe, before the investigation even got underway, perhaps prematurely. But there was so much public pressure to want to know what happened. How did this plane disappear? Is it possible that people came forward thinking, oh, yeah, I saw a green light that night? Because they're already hear about the lights that the pilot saw. So maybe you saw something else 2 or 3 nights ago or last week, and then you hear about this, and you're like, remember? We saw that green object. You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes witnesses come forward after they already know the facts.
Yeah, and really, when you think about it, those people in 78, they were outside all the time. It isn't like today where we're inside and we're playing our video games or on the internet and things like that. I mean, this is 1978.
Enjoying air conditioning. 78, I mean, really, television was the only indoor activity that, or reading or hanging out with your family. And, a lot of people would go outside and look at the night sky, and they would look at things more so, I would think, than here. Look at this. So in 1978, you could have watched the TV program Monkey. I kid you not. An adaptation of the Chinese folktale about pilgrimage to the West undertaken by a monk and his divine guardians. Monkey ran from 1978 to 2004. I guess it was good. Rumpole of the Bailey. What was that on?
I don't know.
An Australian network or something?
Maybe. I don't know. There's Matador. That's another show that was on. The Paper Chase.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. Well, here's some you might remember. Dallas. Different Strokes.
I do remember Dallas.
Taxi.
Who shot JR?
Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
WKRP in Cincinnati. So there was good stuff on, but I mean, at that time there was also a lot of bad stuff on. Return of the Saint.
Well, we didn't have much choice in those days.
Yeah. You didn't have. You had 3 stations. If you were lucky, you had really 1. Maybe another 2 that were real fuzzy. I don't know how many you had.
Not everybody lives in the country the way we grew up, man.
Well, but we're talking Australia. There's like, 1 television station there, and it's mostly stories about the bugs that will kill you so that they don't die. They can identify them.
Come on.
In 1978. So, I mean, they're outside looking up. They know what they're looking at, and they see this green object around this little Cessna. I mean, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah. Well, and, who knows? I mean, it could be the same speculation that these authors made, which is essentially saying he crashed his airplane because of the UFO, not that the UFO crashed the UFO. I mean, crashed the airplane, right? They're saying that they think that, he was just being paced by this object. And of course, on the other hand, just like the motorboat from our eyewitness that reached out to the show, his motorboat engine stopped, so that could have caused engine failure, being that close to the UFO, and caused him to crash as well.
Yeah, could have stalled out his engine, right?
Yeah, like I said, we'll probably never know, but it is a very interesting case.
You know, they had a lot of cigar-shaped UFOs sighted around that time, and I was thinking, have you ever thought that maybe the cigar-shaped UFOs come from Cuba? I'm asking seriously here. I mean, is it possible?
Come on, man.
I mean, I know they got cars from like the 1940s or something, you know, but maybe they got like some German technology from the Nazis, and they just kept it running.
They
with
built
stuff they had laying
cigar-shaped
around.
UFOs.
Yeah.
It has the little label around the middle of it.
Yeah, well,
I have some statistics here of. Let me see.
that's so stupid. You have a
You're the
label.
one that said maybe they come from Cuba because they're cigar-shaped. There's a list out there that these authors of the same paper made. They said aircraft pacing and other forms of reported interference with airplanes by unusual and non-aerodynamically shaped objects is not exceptional. One of the authors has compiled the following list of such events for the general period of 1948 through 1989. 55 cases involving airplane pacing. 15 cases in which the aerial object completely circled the airplane one or more times. 12 cases in which the object suddenly disappeared from the pilot's sight. 22 cases involving a head-on approach to the airplane and a near miss by objects that did not appear to be airplanes, and scores of incidents in which onboard electromagnetic hardware was affected only when the UFO was nearby.
Wow.
That is a common occurrence. So I think that it's reasonable to assume what we know about UFOs and their effect on engines, whatever UFOs are, flying saucers are, these unknown objects, that I think it's reasonable to assume this object got close, paced his aircraft, and caused engine failure or some type of instrument failure because it was after night and he wasn't the most experienced instrument pilot. In fact, he was a 20-year-old with 150 hours of flight time and very little experience. What didn't you say this was his first night flight?
His first and last, apparently.
Yeah, right. So, you know, I think that's plausible. I think it's plausible that he became distracted by whatever he thought those lights were, and that caused him to lose control of his airplane as well. And, you know, there's even been astronomers that, you know, of course, pointed out Venus, Mars, and Saturn or something, and, you know, looked at these pattern of stars, and they're bright in the sky, and he assumed it was that and caused him to start, you know, put his airplane in a death spiral because he became disoriented looking at these bright stars. So there's that. It was a clear night. I mean, there's many theories about how this could have happened. Some very down to earth and some, you know, extraordinary ideas of what could have happened. But the fact remains, I believe the pilot believed that he saw a UFO, a flying saucer. Keep in mind, he was an avid UFO buff. So even if he was seeing something that had a more earthbound explanation, in his mind, he was probably believed he was seeing some type of extraordinary craft.
Yeah.
That could have led to him crashing the airplane.
Yeah, I have a question for you. After hearing this story, particularly that little section you just gave us, where you described a breakdown of different events pilots have had in terms of vehicles pacing them, let me put this into like a more concrete context. Would you want to know what's really going on in our skies, that UFOs are real or just a prosaic explanation for all of these things, to the extent that you would be willing to put taxpayer dollars toward it? And even to break it down even more, we have approximately 186 F-22 Raptors. That's one of our jets. You know what those are, and you can explain it to our listeners in more detail if they really want to know. But those things cost $165 million a piece. So I'm saying let's not build 5 of them and put that money into a program that just looks at the existing databases we have. It cannot cost that much. I mean, I'm a software engineer. I know the problems you have with these large systems. It does not cost that much, particularly today. Not even close to that. And matter of fact, a lot of that data, if it's sitting there in a relational database, the total cost of that thing's not even going to be a couple of million. So I'm saying just take 5 of those planes, don't build them, and put that money towards finding out what the heck is going on in our skies, if for no other reason than to keep our military pilots safe, because they're having direct contact with some of these things that are causing flight risk. This is a no-brainer. I don't know why it is so difficult for a government. If they can print $6 trillion overnight, you can put a couple of billion into this.
We're talking about the cost of a piece of military hardware. I mean, look at the B-2 bomber. You know, they were about $5.5 million. They were about $500 million a piece. And that was back in, 2010? What's that probably now? Like $600 or $700 million a piece. I mean, I know what you're saying, and definitely the money's there if they want to spend the money. It's not like, oh, well, we got to take away from something else. I mean, the money's there, and it's possible they are already spending the money on some of these things. But it's still, despite all the cases we hear and the reports that are made, it's still a pretty rare occurrence. I mean, very rare. When you consider the thousands upon thousands of flights that are taking place every single day around the globe, a UFO encounter with a commercial airliner or any airplane, as far as we know, it just doesn't happen that often. If it did, we would hear about it even more, but it does happen. I think the biggest obstacle with our government or any government or the world is that nobody takes UFOs seriously. I think that UFOs were taken very seriously by our government in the 1940s when no one knew what they were, and suddenly everyone's seeing flying saucers. And we can tell by a lot of the documentation that we have read and the declassified documents now that they took it very seriously early on. But once some of these scientific committees were put together, like the Condon Committee, just got to the point where, the government, the scientific community, they just don't take it seriously. I mean, there may be some government program to study UAPs because there's been this footage released within the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I can guarantee you the vast majority of people in the Pentagon would still look at that as just being a waste of resources, that there's nothing to it, that it's just a waste of time. I don't think they're covering it up. There may be somebody somewhere, some bureaucrats that have something that they don't want to release to the public, but I think that our military and the Pentagon think we have bigger problems in the world than a handful of UFO sightings.
Okay, well, getting back to my point. All right, let's not get rid of 5 F-22s. Let's get rid of 2 toilets on the USS aircraft carrier Ford. Just 2 toilets. Those cost a couple million apiece. And don't get it from the enlisted men, because I'm behind the enlisted men all the way. Take it from some of the officers.
Out of the officers' lounge.
Yeah. And take it out of the office. They can go poop in an enlisted man's toilet. Come on. Couple million. I'm just saying. That's all it takes. 2 toilets. And here you go. The toilets on the Navy's newest aircraft carriers clog frequently, and it costs $400,000 a flush to fix them.
That's a topic for a whole nother episode or podcast.
That's
perhaps.
4 flushes. I'm just saying, 4 flushes. Give me 4 flushes of U.S. dough to get to the bottom of this.
Well, let's see. We've got the new, whatever the new program is. It's too long and complicated to remember, but the successor to ATIP that I guess will...
That uses half of the alphabet to describe itself.
Well, to be honest, man, I have a lot more faith in a guy like that we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast.
Avi Loeb?
Yeah, I have more faith in people like him and people in the civilian scientific community that have started taking some of this stuff seriously. And the resources that we are seeing that are being spent in the private sector, the technology is much better than it used to be. I mean, and much cheaper than it used to be to be able to look at the sky just with civilian hardware. And I think we have a better chance. The believers, the ufologists, and people like that have a much better chance of finding some real evidence than the government will. Because the government, again, I think it's full of people that just don't take it seriously. I mean, somebody might, but... And then if they do find anything, they're never going to tell us.
I wasn't suggesting that you give that money from the government to research this. Not at all.
Oh, okay.
You give it to somebody who actually gets stuff done.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, I think that is all I have for tonight. So let's wrap it up here. What do you think?
I think it's a perfect time to wrap things up before I get on a soapbox and say something really crazy.
Before we get out of here, I'd like to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It helps other people find the show. Please visit our webpage, cosmicsponge.com. There you can find ways to support the show and also check out our web store. Also, all of our episodes are published there, and there's some other interesting information you may find on each episode. Check out Jimmy's work on Instagram. They're always worth a laugh. And check us out on Facebook. A lot of the news stories that we cover here, plus others, we post on there. And we also have a user group called Cosmic Sponge Theorists. So please join. And that way you can get new UFO stories every so often in your inbox. And last, check us out on YouTube, where we've noticed our YouTube listenership has grown over the past few months. So appreciate all you guys connecting to us through YouTube. We plan to do video one of these days. So, Jimmy's just got to make sure he gets his head shaved as close as possible before we go on the air. But we got to figure out a way to buff it down, to keep the lights from shining off of it. So we're still working on some technical details. But once we get all that sorted out, we'll be live on video.
I got a half can of this old wax, car wax. I can use that.
Right. And lastly, our contact information is firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Reach out to us with any comments, suggestions for the show, and also, especially if you have a story that you would like to share with our listeners, we would love to hear it. Jimmy, have I left anything out?
Sure. No. Maybe. I don't know.
All right. With all that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
And Jimmy Coe, keep your ass to the sky and your feet on the ground. See you next week. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.